The Vandalism Stratocaster is undoubtedly Kurt Cobain's most iconic Strat, and one of the most recognizable Strats of all time. But what if I told you that that was his second coolest Strat? It's all subjective, of course, but I believe that Kurt's most interesting Stratocaster is this white Stratocaster that fans have nicknamed the K Records Strat. I recently put together a build of this often forgotten guitar, and it is very quickly becoming one of my favorites. In this video, we will dive deep into all that is currently known about this overlooked Stratocaster, and I will show my build and all the parts that I used for it. "1990 may be the most interesting year in Nirvana's history. I can already hear people typing away, telling me in the comments that 1991 is the most interesting because of Nevermind, or that no, 1993 is the most interesting because of In Utero. But hear me out. 1990 is basically one giant transition year for Nirvana. The way I look at it, there were basically 4 different versions of the band crammed into 1 year. We start out in January with Bleach-era Nirvana, with Chad Channing in the band. This Nirvana toured from January to May, and recorded what was supposed to be their second Sub Pop album with Butch Vig in April. Those recordings would later become known as the Nevermind demos. After the end of the Bleach North American tour in May, Chad parted ways with the band. He was their 4th drummer, and the one that had been in the band for the longest amount of time at that point. This was a huge change, especially considering that major labels were talking to the band about a record deal based off of the strength of those Nevermind demos. Kurt and Chris found themselves with no drummer, at a time when the band's momentum seemed to be speeding up with no sign of stopping. We then don't see Nirvana for 3 months, until August, when they played their first shows since Chad's departure. They now have Dale Crover of the Melvins on drums, not on a permanent basis, but he was filling in to help them out while he had downtime from the Melvins. This second version of the band only played 8 shows, but this is honestly my favorite lineup of Nirvana. Dale is my favorite drummer of all time. His unconventional but genius approach to drumming brought out an entirely new dimension of the band that had not been there before. We saw that potential in the 1988 Dale demos, but it's an entirely different beast when you factor in that Kurt is now writing more pop, sensible songs. We start to see the powerhouse trio that weaves beautiful and memorable melodies into an intense and explosive punk package. After this string of August shows, we get the third and most short-lived version of the band, with the future of his band Mudhoney up in the air. Drummer Dan Peters joined the band on what he thought was a permanent basis. He wrote and recorded Sliver with Kurt and Chris, and played his one and only show with them on September 22nd at the Motorsports Garage in Seattle. Little did he know, in the audience was the drummer who would go on to finally solidify and complete Nirvana's lineup and change the world with them. The 4th version of the band in 1990 happens almost directly after this show, when Dave Grohl joins. He was their 6th drummer at that point, but both Kurt and Chris are on record as saying that they knew they had finally found their perfect drummer after only 1 jam session with him. The chemistry between these 3 is undeniable and legendary. That powerhouse trio that we started to see the beginnings of in August with Dale finally blooms and takes on its full form when Dave joins. Dave played his first show with Kurt and Chris on October 11th at the North Shore Club in Olympia, and would remain in the band until the end. Another huge change that happens in October is Kurt gets his first left-handed Fender guitar. He will go on to be known as one of the most iconic Fender players of the modern era, and it all started with this guitar, a white Japanese Fender Stratocaster that is known as the K Strat, thanks to the black K Records sticker near the input jack. K Records is an influential indie label based in Olympia, Washington. One of the founders is Calvin Johnson. We hear Kurt speaking with him before and after his solo radio show performance of Opinion.
Hey kids, got a special treat for you today. Kurt Cobain's here. You know, Kurt Cobain from Aberdeen. What's going on, baby?
Not a damn thing.
That was on the Boy Meets Girl show, which Calvin hosted. Kurt loved K Records, so much so that he not only put their logo on this guitar, but he also got the logo tattooed on his arm. When asked about why he has this tattoo, Kurt is quoted as answering it was to try to remind me to stay a child. This is the only tattoo Kurt ever had. He tattooed it onto himself, and it is believed to be referenced in the lyrics of Lounge Act. The exact specs of this Strat are a little bit of a mystery. It has a 1-ply, 8-hole pickguard, which leads us to believe that it's either a late 80s or a 1990 Japanese Strat. Rosewood neck and white finish. It has 2 single-coil pickups, which are most likely stock. But what is most interesting is the unknown angled humbucker. Humbuckers and Strats are normally just horizontal, not angled. We can speculate that this is a mod that Kurt potentially did himself, making the bridge route in the pickguard bigger to fit a humbucker while using the original single-coil screw holes. The exact model of the humbucker is up for debate. I've seen people suggest that it's a Seymour Duncan JB, but I don't believe that it was. The JB has the Seymour Duncan logo on it, while the K Strat humbucker has no logo. Kurt has this reputation of being a big JB user thanks to his In Utero era Mustangs, but we don't see him with a JB until October 1992. I don't believe he was using a JB as early as the fall of 1990. It being blank can lead us in the direction of the Seymour Duncan 59, a pickup that Kurt is known to have used later on in the Vandalism Stratocaster. Kurt's guitar tech Ernie Bailey has said that he believes the K Strat pickup is either a Seymour Duncan 59 or a Seymour Duncan Distortion, as those are what Kurt favored at that time. The potential first documentation we have of him with this guitar is this home footage featured in Live Tonight Sold Out. Taken at a party at the Novoselic house sometime in October of 1990, Kurt is essentially just in the background playing what seems to be a cool, rough sketch of a song idea, using the K Strat and his Randall head. The first time we see this guitar on stage is October 24th in London. The next day, on October 25th, Nirvana played at Leeds in the UK. This show is a fan favorite among the diehards, and might be one of the best early Dave shows. He used the K Strat for the majority of the show, and used his Mosrite Gospel for only 3 of the 18 songs. This is a stark contrast for the Mosrite, an extremely interesting guitar in its own right. We first see that guitar in August while Dale was in the band, and by the photos and videos available, it's easy to speculate that this was his favorite guitar at that time. It was his most used guitar by far from August to October, where he often played entire shows with it. But after the K Strat comes into the picture, its usage suggests that it took the top spot for his favorite guitar. So to see the Gospel bumped down and used for only a few songs really shows just how much Kurt must have loved his first proper left-handed Fender guitar. We will refer to this preference of his when we discuss the recording of Nevermind later on in this video. Nirvana played 8 shows in the UK in October of 1990, but while they were there, they also recorded a BBC session on October 21st. Their first recording session with Dave, they recorded 4 covers: Son of a Gun, Molly's Lips, Turnaround, and D7. All 4 of these songs were first released on the January 1992 EP Hormoning. And all of those songs, except for D7, wound up on Incesticide, which was released later in 1992. Kurt's tone at this BBC session is straightforward, but there's something about it that has always made it one of my favorite Nirvana tones. There's an aggressive bite with a ring of clarity in his distorted tone. It sounds so big that it's enough to make someone think it's two guitar players playing in perfect unison. And on D7, it sounds like he's using a neck pickup. It especially sounds this way for the cleans. Now, unless we get a direct quote from one of these 6 people, we may never know what guitar Kurt used on these songs. We can only speculate with what we hear and use what footage we have from around that time as evidence. Only the people who were in the room can definitively say what gear was used. Given how the K Strat had become his primary guitar for these UK shows, I think it's safe to speculate that it was used on most, if not all of the songs. To my ears, these 4 songs all sound like the same guitar, and D7's cleans sound like a classic Strat neck tone to me. I was very happy to be able to get near these tones with my K Strat build, but there are multiple ways to skin a cat. I can't tell you for certain that this guitar was used on these songs by Kurt in 1990, but I can say that a K Strat build in 2023 is capable of producing these tones. After the end of this short UK run, Nirvana return home and play a show that is epic in every way, November 25th at the Off Ramp in Seattle. One of their biggest, if not biggest, set list. They played a whopping 30 songs. The giant set ranges from Bleach songs, future Nevermind songs, and even a super early version of radio-friendly unit shifter. They opened with Aneurysm. It was that song's live debut, and it's a blistering and intense version that stands out from all the other performances of it. Among various different audio sources, we thankfully have enough to patch together what seems like a full version of this show. But I've seen speculation that there actually might be more to the show we haven't heard yet. For as much audio as we have no video and only have one lone picture, and it's Kurt playing the K Strat. Again, this is my complete guess, but to my ears this legendary show sounds very Strat heavy. I'm willing to bet it followed suit with the prior UK shows, 95% K Strat, and the Mosrite on a handful of songs. From here, we go into 1991, the year that Nirvana would change the world. They literally started the year in the studio, recording in the Music Source in Seattle on January 1st, with their live sound engineer Craig Montgomery at the soundboard. This is another session that features some amazing, in-your-face distorted tones, and I'm willing to bet it's mostly the K Strat like the BBC session 3 months prior. One of Nirvana's best songs, even in his youth, was recorded at this session in its definitive form. There's also an early version of Aneurysm that resembles the off-ramp performance and is slightly different from the more well-known Incesticide version. We continue to see a lot of the K Strat in the early months of the year. Another notable show is March 8th at the Commodore Ballroom in Vancouver, Canada. It's a great energy-filled set that we thankfully have a high-quality audience recording of, and many iconic Charles Peterson photos were taken at this show, including this one. Probably one of the coolest photos of Kurt, period. Him playing the K Strat upside down. This image is on the back of some of the versions of the Smells Like Teen Spirit single. Ironically, both B-sides were taken from that January 1st Music Source session, so there is a chance that the guitar pictured on the back is the same one that was used to record those 2 songs. The last video footage that we have of this guitar is April 17th at the OK Hotel in Seattle. This is the show where Smells Like Teen Spirit had its live debut. After this show are the Nevermind sessions at Sound City in California from May 2nd to May 28th. It's an entire can of worms to try to figure out which guitars were used for which songs. And unless we have a quote from one of these people regarding it, we may never 100% know which guitars were used for specific songs. But it is still fun to speculate and to try to piece this puzzle together by using what evidence that we have. I personally believe that Nevermind is a Strat-heavy album. We do have this picture that shows us a Strat was used at least on Endless Nameless, which came off of a failed lithium take. To my ears, it sounds like the down-tuned songs, and these outtakes are Strats. In my opinion, the clean tones in these songs is what gives that away. Given how the K Strat looks like it was a favorite guitar in this time period, I feel comfortable guessing that the K Strat is on Nevermind, but to what extent it was used, I can't say. One day after the Nevermind sessions ended, on May 29th, Nirvana played at Jabberjaw in Los Angeles. Much like the Off-Ramp show, this is arguably one of their best shows, and while we have a great clear audience recording of it, we have no video and frustratingly, only 2 low-quality pictures that don't give us much insight as to what gear was used. In this picture, we can see a Fender headstock and what looks to be a white horn, so we can more or less guess that this is the K Strat. With this show being only one day after the sessions ended, and only 12 miles away from Sound City, I think it's safe to assume that the gear that was at this show was also with the band at Sound City for the previous 4 weeks while they were recording. Now here's the heartbreaking part of this story. Supposedly, some gear was stolen at this show. We never see the K Strat after this picture, which is unusual for a guitar that Kurt had been using so heavily up until that point. I think that we can sadly conclude that this guitar was most likely one of the pieces of gear that was stolen at this show. There has never been any trace of it, so we don't know what became of it after this show and where it is present day. John Lennon's stolen Gibson J160E, which was used to write and record many early Beatle hits, was missing for over 50 years, but turned up at an auction in 2015 and sold for $2.4 million. It's a long shot, but I really hope something similar happens with the K Strat. As Kurt Cobain's first Fender, and a guitar that was potentially used on Nevermind, this is an important instrument in the story of Nirvana, and it'd be amazing to see it present day, and to just know that it's still intact. This is my build of this amazing guitar. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I've always had a thing for white on white Strats. They just look really sleek and elegant to me. I recently put together a VMA Strat build, as I really wanted to start dialing in some hot rail Strat tones. My plan initially was to get all the tones I could get out of it, and then convert it to a K Strat. I really fell in love with this guitar. A hot rail and a Stratocaster is one of the best guitar combos in my opinion. I really didn't want to take it out, so I decided to start from scratch for a K Strat. On Marketplace, I found a great local deal on a made in Mexico Fender Strat. I got that and removed the neck to use for this build. I discovered while looking for a body that Olympic and Arctic white can mean a lot of different things depending on the year and the exact model. Lots of Olympic white guitars out there have a slight yellow tint to it, but I wanted a really pure teeth white Strat body. I ended up getting a new 2023 Squier Sonic Stratocaster in Arctic white. I pulled it apart so I could use just the body itself. For the single coil pickups, it was a very easy decision. I have Tex-Mex single coils in my VMA Strat, and I love them so much that that's what I got for this build too. I have another future Kurt Strat build in mind, and I will get more creative with that one, and I'm going to try to find a different set of single coils to try out. But for this one, I just went with something reliable that I already know that I love, so I went with the Tex-Mex. For the humbucker, I was deciding between either a Seymour Duncan 59 or a Seymour Duncan Distortion, based off of what Ernie has said. I ultimately went with the 59B. I have the 59N in my Vandalism Strat, and I thought it would be kind of neat if these guitars almost mirrored each other, opposite colors and opposite 59s. Very happy I went with this one, as it sounds amazing and has been serving me well for the tones from this era. I got a custom 1-ply 8-hole pickguard. To complete the look, I got this K Records sticker off of Etsy. I'm not entirely sure why, but a few people have been asking me why I didn't use a red sticker. It has always looked black to me. We can especially see that in these color photos. There's something a little funky about my build that I want to point out. The 59 is not sitting at a perfect angle. The bottom right of the pickup is touching the body, therefore very slightly throwing off the angle. I noticed this after wiring everything up and screwing on the pickguard. I could have gone back and tried to chip away at the wood so it could sit perfectly, but I just decided to roll with it. I was just so excited in the moment to string it up and to play it. I am really happy with the tone I'm getting out of it, so I figure let's just leave this already weirdly angled humbucker looking just a little more awkward. It's not going to hurt anything. Plus, it's most likely that Kurt was doing his own mods in this time period, so it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that he had a Strat with a not perfectly angled humbucker. I know that's kind of a stretch, I recognize that, but that's just how I'm justifying this in my head. You really only notice it if you're looking closely for it. I might one day open it up to chip away at the wood, but for now, I'm very happy with it as it is. As much as I love my VMA Strat, and I know I very recently proclaimed my love for this guitar, I do like this one more. These two guitars are very similar, but the 59 is just a more satisfying pickup in my opinion. The K Strat has quickly climbed up on my list of favorite guitars.